An unexpected magical mystery tour.
It's complicated.
It's a town that tears things down.
Kind of a crazy place, but I can't say that.
Houston is a mess.
It's a wonderful mess. I love it.
Expect the unexpected.
Houston is a thriving metropolis.
Fascinating, dynamic, complicated organism.
A lot of opportunity, a lot of friendly people.
A very vibrant urban city.
I've listened to so much bullshit about it that I've kind of turned some of it off.
Houston is like a giant octopus. It's too big to define.
In 1836, a couple of real estate hucksters, the Allen brothers, came here and declared that on these banks there will be a city.
They had the vision to see that they could establish a center that would be a great commercial center.
The brothers' plan wasn't to establish just another city. They wanted to build a prominent enterprise. They searched along the bayous to find the ideal location. On the banks of Buffalo Bayou was declared the new home for an emerging metropolis.
There's a wonderful ad that they placed in newspapers around the country that promised a place that was well-watered and salubrious, when actually the banks of Buffalo Bayou and most of Houston were swampland. It was malaria infested, and a rough place to get started.
Nonetheless, Houston did grow. Railroads began to connect the region to the rest of the country. At the turn of the century, Galveston was struck by a devastating hurricane, prompting the dredging of the Houston Ship Channel to bring the port inland. Oil was discovered and became an economic driver. In a few short years, Houston became the most populated city in Texas. Its success can be attributed to its foundation along Buffalo Bayou.
Some people call it the Mother Bayou. It's this slow-moving body of water that passes through downtown.
The bayou served the city as an economic utility. However, its ecology was abused and ignored, subject to clearing, dredging, and straightening.
I couldn't understand why anyone would call it the Bayou City and say that fondly. They were ugly, the water was brown, it smelled bad. The bayou was not a place you wanted to be.
It was treated as a kind of public utility. The city drew its drinking water from the bayou, but it also dumped its sewage into the bayou. It was a commercial highway more than it was a scenic amenity.
Although polluted, the bayou still spurred Houston's exponential growth. The city literally built atop the waterway.
You know, this is a frontier town. People are squeezing buildings in anywhere they can. They're selling land. They built, on the banks of the bayou. They built over the bayou. There were breweries, hotels, all kinds of structures.
Houston developed over a large surface area with low-density sprawl. Vast amounts of native prairie were covered with concrete and asphalt.
And we get about 48 inches of rain a year. Naturally, the bayous would drain those rainfalls off. But unfortunately, we pave over most of the ground surfaces.
You can't separate the river from a floodplain. When it rains, all of a sudden that water responds to the landscape that it lands on so much differently. It starts to move faster. That's a very important concept. That's time of concentration. Nobody was thinking about floodplains back then. In the end, it caught up with us. It rained, as it does periodically here, and it rained really hard.
The exponential growth of the city into the bayou's natural floodplains left little unadulterated space for water to be absorbed or collected. Any storm would be a potential for disaster.
So in 1929, that's exactly what happened. We had a late May thunderstorm set over the city, and it just rained.
And so it all rushed downtown When a wall of water comes that way, all that stuff just got torn out.
It shut down the ship channel for many months that interfered with the commerce. It flooded most of the downtown area, and it also had 6 deaths.
It was a disaster. It was a man-made disaster, but we just happened to be building our city in that location where that happens, and we were not ready for it. We jam all this water down into that poor little stream. That poor little stream, hey, you know, it can take care of itself, and it will start adjusting, and it'll adapt to the new watershed conditions.
Nearly 500,000 people live within Buffalo Bayou's watershed. With 116 miles of open streams, its extensive watershed spans 100 square miles of land. Buffalo Bayou is only one of 22 major waterways within the county. Each watershed is susceptible to flooding due to the flat topography and heavy rainfall of the region. Houston was in need of a solution to save itself from the destruction caused by flooding.
In '29, there was a lot of talk about what do we do about this. We need to pay attention to this. It's a threat to the future of the city.
Unfortunately, we went through many periods where there was no large storm and we forgot, and so we would build down too low.
And there were editorials in the newspaper, and there was a lot of discussion about it, but nothing was really done. And when it doesn't rain for a while, everything else takes precedence.
People started building buildings over the bayou. I mean, I look at that and I go, how could you do that? How could you basically build a dam across the stream that you know drains land all the way out into western Harris County? But they did.
Just 6 years later, we had the largest flood in the city's history.
The force of this water against these, you know, massive buildings actually washed the buildings away. They were literally carried away by the bayou.
Well, gee, if you have a house nearby, sorry, the river doesn't care that the house is there. It's going to take the land that it wants. Water takes mountains. A house, little retaining wall, no problem for a real river.
Again, the editorials in the paper was we must not forget like we did in '29. Those 2 storms back to back, with a few years apart, was something that really got the community leaders' attention.
So as a result of that flood, we said, help. And we went to the government. I say we, it's the business leaders, it's citizens saying, we got to do something.
I think the '29 flood was considered a fluke. And then, 6 years later, the same thing happens, only worse. And people say, well, looks like we need to do something about this. So you have the creation of the Harris County Flood Control District in 1937.
The first projects we built with the Corps of Engineers were actually detention reservoirs, Addicks and Barker reservoirs.
Thousands of acres of land protected with a levee that when a big flood comes, they can fill up with water during that sudden downpour, and then slowly, over time, they drain them out.
The construction of the 2 reservoirs, I think we'd all have to agree, still must be considered a brilliant move.
A lot of people don't realize this, that the local community has to go and fight for the Corps to come to your community.
The bad old federal government, keep out of our business in Texas, is the one who saved Houston.
Construction began in 1940 by the Army Corps of Engineers. Both dams were completed in 1945 at the cost of $4 million. Estimated savings from flood damage prevention today is over $16 million per year.
If those 2 flood control devices were not there, we would have a lot of flooding downstream of both of those dams.
After World War II, development surged again in Houston. As a result, the dams were not enough protection against potentially large storms. Something else needed to be done.
There's always a storm that's bigger than what we designed for. We need to increase the capacity of systems to move water.
So they said, well, okay, we're just going to have to move that water down Buffalo Bayou. So they created a plan to channelize Buffalo Bayou.
So they took the natural channels and straightened them to make them more efficient.
And the thinking at the time was you dig the straightest, biggest ditch you can and get the water out to the Gulf of Mexico as quickly as you can.
Unfortunately, in Houston, the channelization didn't end the flooding.
We still have flooding in Houston. And The channelization that occurred in Buffalo Bayou Park created other problems that we're now needing to address.
Channelization, I think anyone in Houston will tell you, is not the most environmental friendly type of work you can do along a bayou.
It's not just the concrete in the bayou. It's also all the concrete in the roads, in the shopping centers, in our residential areas. All of that water flows off very quickly. It creates bacteria problems, which means it can cause disease to humans. So that means we can't swim in the bayous. That means we can't fish in the bayous. It means we can't do a lot of things that we used to be able to do.
The food chain starts with the biology of the natural system, and in a concrete bottom channel, you don't have much of that.
When you make it to where it's a very sterile, hard surface, you take away the natural ability of that waterway to cleanse itself.
And you go to those bayous today, and many stretches look like a concrete-lined drainage ditch.
When you straitjacket the river, you're fighting the river, just like a crazy guy in a straitjacket, fighting it. And if he's smart, like Houdini, he'll get out of it, right? Well, the river's pretty smart. And so the flood control district spends lots of money having to fix the concrete and fix channel bank and fix erosion constantly, year after year. It's a maintenance burden that they have to bear, that we pay the tax dollars.
This erosion leads to tons of fine silt deposited in the bayou, which harbors bacteria, deposits dunes of sand on downtown walkways, and ultimately settles into the Houston Ship Channel, which then has to be dredged using public tax funding.
If a 1-inch rain occurs throughout the watershed, we receive over 4 billion gallons of rain. With a 10-inch rain, which we often get during tropical storms, that would be 40 billion gallons of water. And so there's just no way you can control a flood like that by just doing flood control along the embankments of the bayou.
Channelization has become kind of a derogatory term in terms of the environmental impacts. We were created to provide flood damage reduction. We're not out just building ecosystems to build the systems. We're out providing flood damage reduction projects.
The channelization of the bayou did not prevent flooding no more than it has prevented flooding in any other channelized stream. In other words, in Houston, as long as it rains, it's going to flood.
So many parts of the area getting hammered by rain right now.
Just every day has been rain, rain, rain every single morning.
This can be a dangerous situation. They've never seen the water this high, and it's coming very close to homes in this neighborhood.
The issue we always run into is that when it doesn't rain for a while, these other things take precedent. And then after a flood, it's like, why didn't you do something about it?
So sometimes people sort of say, oh, the Corps of Engineers are the bad guys that came to town with these bad plans, but they forget that it's the local community that has begged the Corps to come.
So I can't harshly fault them, but gosh, I wish they knew back then what we know today, which is that that doesn't really solve the problem.
So the plan to straighten Buffalo Bayou, people said, well, wait a minute, do we really need to do that? Because Buffalo Bayou was starting to be appreciated as something more than just a drainage ditch.
As they moved upstream and were getting ready to concrete line it, we had some incredible citizens who stopped the Army Corps of Engineers.
They induced their local congressman to actually go to Congress and argue that this was the wrong project. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee looked this young congressman in the eye and he said, now,
do you understand that you're, as the representative for your district in Houston, you're turning down federal money?
That's correct. We think there's a better way to do flood damage reduction or flood control.
This young congressman would turn out to be George H.W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States.
And thanks to Terry Hershey and George Bush, Buffalo Bayou, our heartline, was not channelized.
The city's mindset regarding the waterway began to change from strictly an economic utility to include its contributions as an important ecological and recreational resource.
We'd never seen what a bayou could look like, how it could be lovely.
New parks were developed along the banks where you could physically get to the bayou.
The water quality improved vastly. Houston stopped doing things like allowing raw sewage to leak in, which will improve people's opinion.
Buffalo Bayou retained much of its natural state, providing wildlife ecosystems within the heart of a dynamic city.
The natural environment and habitat cleanses our water if we allow it to work as it should and as it normally does. Same with clean air. Those trees and vegetation, they take in some of those air pollutants and hold them so that we don't breathe them into our bodies and destroy our lungs and our ability to breathe.
Improving the bayou has an economic overlay.
If you don't have a clean and healthy environment, then your economy ultimately is not going to do as well as it should.
It benefits the private interests who develop properties that people will desire along the bayou, along the green areas, but it also improves the tax base, which adds to the funding for schools. So really, overall, the city wins. All the citizens of the city win.
A dialogue addressing economic demands, urban development, and ecological stewardship expounded. The nonprofit Buffalo Bayou Partnership was created to protect and improve the Bayou Corridor. The Buffalo Bayou Partnership built Sesquicentennial Park, which showed what an urban riverfront could be like in Houston. They built Allen's Landing, which celebrated the historic and original Embarcadero of Houston, and they acquired land for new parks and connected those parks with the Bayou side trails.
Our organization in 2002 published a major master plan called Buffalo Bayou and Beyond. We'd like to see residential, commercial development along the bayou because that will activate the edge of the bayou.
For many years, it wasn't widely accessed, but the more connections that are made, the more people use it.
We have an opportunity to have this wonderful green web that covers the city and allows us to experience nature.
The bayous offer an incredible opportunity to have hike and bike trails and parks along this interconnected system of parks and open space.
Led by the SWA group, the Sabine and Bagby Promenade was the plan to bring a neglected section of Buffalo Bayou buried under freeways and roadway bridges in downtown back to life.
The bayou down there, the before pictures were terrible. You know, they had shopping carts and debris, and it was just a really messy kind of place. If the water in an urban area looks ugly, people won't care. It's tough to get them to care. We need to work with the river. We need to lay the banks back where we can to give the river a little bit more room. We need to create trails that feel safe. We need to have a lot of lighting down there because at night, you know, it's really spooky being under bridges at night. That's where troglodytes live and spooky things happen. It's actually, ironically, not that unsafe, but it sure feels unsafe. So we had to change how all that felt.
The first segment from Sabine Street to Bagby was completed in 2003 and was transformed into a beautiful urban park by the SWA group and help from both public and private partnerships.
People could see that you could take a kind of derelict, tough urban environment and actually make it really stunningly beautiful. Collaborating with artists, lighting designers, and working with the flood control district in a highly impacted urban area. You've got freeways overhead, utilities, city streets, all these kind of things. How do you make it feel safe? How do you make it feel comfortable for people to move through there? And it was quite successful. It formed this connection that was desperately needed, and you know, now you go down there and it feels like a comfortable landscape to be in. And so as a result of that work, some leading citizens in our community here said, gee, wouldn't it be wonderful to do a similar level of upgrade to the stretch of bayou between the Sabine Street Bridge and Shepherd. It's going to be a very green, very soft, very beautiful environment.
As the city continues to grow, Houston is working to bring citizens to the bayou by creating access via parks and trails.
We have this major initiative, this Bayou Greenway project, and it's a system of trails along our bayou systems.
This system that has incredible potential can actually connect the city together along green space rather than through roadways and freeways.
You know, you want to get that access though so people can see that beauty. Because if they understand that beauty, they will help you protect it.
The Bayou Greenways Initiative passed in 2012, propelling a long-range plan that envisions the Bayou system as the backbone of an equitable, accessible park system in Houston. Harris County Flood Control District has laid out a long-term plan focused on flood damage control called Charting Buffalo.
Charting Buffalo is an effort to have a smart development and add to the storage capacity.
To have flooding be a lot less often occurrence in the community.
It really has identified a multitude of projects that could be implemented over, you know, the next 20 or 30 years.
They're charting Buffalo Bayou as if they were explorers from the moon.
I think they call it charting Buffalo to make it sound nice, you know. You make something that's awful sound nice so people will think, oh, it's okay. But charting Buffalo, to me, when you look at what they're proposing, is going to, you know, dismantle and destroy a lot of those little remnant natural areas. And it basically talks about, in my opinion, taming Buffalo Bayou, doing a lot of erosion control projects and other things that are going to make the bayou less wild and less able to function as itself.
What we did with Charting Buffalo was look at where is the big erosion problem occurring and look at what our opportunities are for how do we address the flooding and the erosion problems in order to make the system more stable.
And they talk about making a stable stream. You know, a wild stream is inherently unstable and moves on its own and deposits sediment and erodes here and creates wonderful wildlife habitat. What we need to do is just to take a step back. We don't need to go around and do a lot of enhancing. We need to allow the bayou to just live and function, and it will do just fine.
Sure, it's controversial. A lot of these changes will be. Our society needs better storage and conveyance.
The engineers are always wanting to look at what's the most economic thing to do. Does the community want these things, and are they willing to pay for it? Are they willing to raise taxes?
If the community really wants it as just park space, just the way it is, great. Raise the money, buy it, turn it into a park just as it is, so flood control can take the money and go upstream or downstream and find other places to dig out with community embracing the, you know, that different project.
Sure, we need the conveyance. We need the utility value of that waterway. But we also want to have the other amenities. We want to have a pleasant place for having habitats. So there's many competing issues with those waterways.
I'm not concerned with all the things that you're telling me about how positive it is. I don't believe you. I don't know what they're pitching. I mean, I can barely stand to sit in the room with these people and listen to this dribble about moving water and changing the river. Leave it alone. You can leave it alone. When it rains in Houston, it's going to flood. You can leave it alone. You can find other methods to approach floodwater.
It's not going to be easy. We just have to come through as a consensus, come to agreements in this process.
The community continues to explore methods to control flooding amidst population growth and increasing concern for ecology.
Flooding in the city of Houston is our natural hazard. It's always been that way.
And so Harris County Flood Control District is in a difficult position because they're trying to reduce flooding, because some people live in the floodplain when they shouldn't.
The fact is, Houston is a growing population center. It's not like we can tell people stay out of this area. They're coming. We just have to be smart about how we accommodate the growing population.
My vision is that we'll have less flooding, obviously, that our systems will be more natural and more environmentally friendly, that will have all these extra benefits.
Everybody wants to have it both ways, but there comes a point where you go, you know, that's really not going to get it if you want it natural.
We get into arguments over a tree that needs to come down for a project. Well, you know, 100 years from now, that tree would have lived its life and died on most cases, and we'll plant 10 to replace it. But the idea, it's hard to get past people's current needs versus what you want in the long run.
Someone needs to speak for the bayou or the prairie or the birds or whatever it is. It is an impossible battle. We're fighting all the development that's going on that's wiping out the last natural areas around the city of Houston.
Some of these concrete lined channels we have, I rely on the capacity that they can deliver right now, how much water they can move. So it's not just a matter of undoing the concrete, I've got to make the channel bigger.
We're way behind in doing the things we need to for our quality of life and for protecting nature and having nature protect us and recognizing that. So there's a dichotomy there that we still have not come to terms with. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how many battles I have lost, but you just got to move forward. You got three choices. The first is you're in denial, you do nothing. The second is you jump off the cliff. And the third one is you fight, and I choose to fight.
Regardless of the outcome, Houston will continue to grow and the bayou will continue to flow. The city is trending towards a more ecologically friendly approach to watershed management.
I came to Houston in the middle 1980s and couldn't figure out for the life of me why people would fondly call the place the Bayou City. Because to me, the Bayou was nothing to brag about. The Bayou has changed, as well as the perception of the Bayou. The idea that Houston can be beautiful, that there's something natural here, that there's something to be proud of, ties into that newer idea about Buffalo Bayou.
We're sort of camping with this great city by the banks of a river that was here long before we were here, and it will be here long after we're probably gone. So it deserves kind of the seat of honor at our urban table. As we build the city around it, we really ought to be giving it its due measure of respect.
Most Houstonians miss what I call the Bayou Bliss. It's the interpenetration of the natural forest with the cultural forest. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Bayou. I have to go to the Bayou. That's just my artistic sensibility.
Buffalo Bayou is mysterious. It's in the midst of the city, and yet at the same time, it seems to have a life apart from the everyday life of Houston.
The wildness is important because we as humans have been so tamed and civilized, we've forgotten that we are too wild creatures. And it's one way for us to reconnect to nature. It represents life. It represents our place on the landscape. It connects us to that which is important.
That's magic. That's where I go. It's an epiphany to be there in this wilderness that runs through Houston.
Buffalo Bayou is the source and the origin of all that is in Houston.
Buffalo Bayou is a treasure beyond estimation. Houston is the Bayou City.
We're the place that put a human being on the moon. We have the ability to envision things and then not just envision them, but do the hard work necessary to make them a reality. That's Houston.